ghostly train station. The storm raged, relentless and wild, soaking the earth with sheets of rain. Clara stood at the edge of the deserted platform, her umbrella barely shielding her from the icy onslaught. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from an unsettling sense of dread. She glanced at her watch, 11:57 p.m. The train was supposed to arrive at midnight, yet the tracks had been silent for years. The station was a relic of a forgotten time. Weeds grew through the cracks in the concrete, and the paint on the wooden benches had long since peeled away. Faint whispers seemed to carry on the wind, mingling with the rhythm of the rain. Clara had heard the rumors, but desperation drove her here. She needed to see for herself if the stories were true. According to legend, a spectral train, the Midnight Veil, appeared only during fierce storms. It carried passengers to the afterlife, a one-way journey for those who had lost their way in the living world. Clara's brother, Ethan, had vanished 2 years ago. The last anyone saw of him was at this very station on a night much like this one. As the clock struck midnight, the rain intensified, hammering against the platform like a relentless drumbeat. Suddenly, the air grew unnaturally still, the howling wind silenced as though the world were holding its breath. A low, mournful whistle echoed through the night, sending chills down Clara's spine. Out of the darkness, the train emerged, its form hazy and translucent. Its carriages gleamed with an otherworldly light, flickering like the dying glow of a candle. The train's wheels didn't touch the tracks. Instead, it hovered slightly above them, gliding forward with an eerie grace. Clara's heart pounded as the train came to a halt before her. The doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Shadows danced along the walls, and the faint sound of distant, sorrowful music wafted out. Gathering her courage, Clara stepped inside. The interior of the train was unlike anything she had ever seen. The seats were occupied by passengers whose faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes staring blankly ahead. Their clothing spanned centuries, from Victorian dresses to modern jeans, as though the train had been collecting souls for an eternity. A conductor appeared, his figure tall and gaunt, clad in a uniform that seemed to shift between solid and spectral. His hollow eyes met Clara's, and he extended a skeletal hand. "Ticket?" he rasped, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. I'm looking for someone," Clara stammered. "My brother, Ethan Foster. Have you seen him?" The conductor tilted his head, as if considering her words. Without a response, he turned and began walking down the aisle. Clara hesitated before following, her footsteps echoing unnaturally in the quiet. As they moved deeper into the train, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to thicken. Finally, the conductor stopped before a seat near the back. There sat Ethan, his face pale and his body unnervingly still. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan!" she cried, rushing to him. But as she reached out, her hand passed through him as though he were made of smoke. Ethan's eyes flickered with recognition. "Clara?" His voice was faint, barely audible over the distant hum of the train. "Why are you here?" "I came to find you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We've been searching for you for so long." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't have come. This train, it's not for the living." Before Clara could respond, the conductor's voice rang out. "All passengers must have a ticket." He loomed behind her, his hollow gaze piercing her very soul. "I don't have a ticket," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Then you cannot stay," the conductor intoned. He raised a hand and the train began to tremble. Shadows surged toward Clara, pulling at her, dragging her back toward the doors. "No!" Clara screamed, reaching for Ethan. "Come with me!" Ethan's expression was filled with sorrow. "I can't. My place is here now. You have to let me go." The shadows enveloped her, and the next thing Clara knew, she was lying on the rain-soaked platform. The train was gone, and the storm was beginning to subside. She sat up, her heart heavy with grief. In her hand, she clutched a single object, Ethan's pocket watch, its hands frozen at midnight. The legend of the Midnight Veil was true, and now Clara understood its purpose. It wasn't just a train for the dead, it was a bridge for those who couldn't let go. But letting go was the hardest thing of all. The soaked graveyard. The rain fell in torrents, pounding against the earth with a relentless fury. The village of Black Hollow huddled beneath the storm's wrath, its streets empty and windows shuttered. No one dared venture out during such weather, not when the rain awakened the horrors of the soaked graveyard. Nestled at the edge of the village, the graveyard sprawled across uneven terrain, its gravestones tilted and cracked with age. A jagged iron fence encircled it, though it did little to keep the darkness within. The ground, saturated with rain, turned to mud that bubbled and churned as though alive. The villagers whispered of a curse. Decades ago, a flood had swept through Black Hollow, submerging the cemetery and drowning the mourners who had gathered for a funeral. Since then, whenever rain drenched the earth, the dead clawed their way to the surface, seeking vengeance for their restless slumber. Emma had heard the stories all her life, but never believed them. That changed the night her brother disappeared. It had been a night much like this one. Liam, ever the skeptic, had dared to test the legend, venturing into the graveyard as the rain began to fall. He had never returned. Now, clutching a lantern and wrapped in a heavy cloak, Emma stood at the graveyard gates, the storm raging around her. "I'm coming for you, Liam," she whispered, pushing the gate open. It screeched in protest, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. The graveyard was a mire of mud and rainwater, the gravestones looming like jagged teeth in the dark. Emma's lantern cast flickering shadows that danced across the headstones, giving them the appearance of movement. She stepped carefully, her boots sinking into the sodden ground. A low moan drifted through the air, barely audible over the storm. Emma froze, her breath hitching. The sound came again, this time louder, and it seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The mud at her feet began to ripple, and a pale, skeletal hand broke the surface, grasping blindly. Emma staggered back, stifling a scream as more hands emerged, clawing their way upward. The rain intensified, and with it, the dead rose. Their faces were gaunt and hollow, their eyes dark pits that seemed to drink in the light. Water streamed from their decayed forms as they dragged themselves free of the earth, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Liam!" Emma cried, her voice trembling. She spun in place, searching for any sign of her brother. The dead paid her no mind at first, their attention fixed on the village beyond. But as Emma moved deeper into the graveyard, their heads turned toward her in unison, their eyeless gazes piercing. One of the risen stepped forward, its movements deliberate. It wore tattered remains of a suit, its skeletal fingers clutching a rusted locket. Emma's heart clenched as she recognized it. The locket had belonged to Liam. "No," she whispered, backing away. "No, no, no!" The figure let out a guttural snarl and lunged. Emma turned and ran, her lantern swinging wildly and casting erratic beams of light. The dead pursued, their groans rising in a macabre chorus. She slipped and fell, the mud swallowing her lantern and plunging her into darkness. Panicking, Emma scrambled to her feet, her hands sinking into the muck. She felt something cold and solid beneath her fingers and pulled it free. It was a rusted shovel, its blade jagged but sturdy. As the dead closed in, Emma swung it wildly, the metal slicing through the air. She struck one of the creatures, its skull shattering with a sickening crunch, but more came, their hands grasping at her. "Liam!" she screamed again, tears mixing with the rain. A voice, weak and trembling, called out from the darkness. "Emma?" Her heart leaped. She turned toward the sound, spotting a faint glow in the distance. Clutching the shovel, she pushed through the horde, her boots slipping in the muck. She reached a sunken mausoleum, its entrance partially collapsed. Inside, Liam huddled against the wall, holding a flickering candle. "Liam!" Emma cried, rushing to him. He looked up, his face pale and gaunt, but alive. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "They don't let anyone leave." The dead surrounded the mausoleum, their bodies pressing against the narrow entrance. Emma gripped the shovel tightly, her mind racing. "We'll find a way," she said. "We have to." Liam shook his head. "The rain, it's their tether. We have to stop it." Emma glanced at the sky, the rain pouring in relentless sheets. An idea took root in her mind, wild and desperate. "The chapel," she said. "The bell tower. If we can ring the bell, maybe it will break the curse." With no other options, they fled the mausoleum, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws. The chapel loomed ahead, its spire barely visible through the rain. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, the pews rotting and the altar covered in moss. The bell tower's ladder was slick with rain, but Emma climbed, her hay Introduction. In a remote, desolate village in India lies an ancient Haveli, mansion, shrouded in mystery and fear. Known as the Cooney Haveli, it is believed to be cursed by its former owner, Thakur Veer Singh, who was brutally murdered along with his family in a horrifying massacre over a century ago. Locals claim to hear screams, see shadows, and experience an unnatural chill whenever they venture near. Three adventurous friends, Ria, Aman, and Kunal, decide to explore the Haveli as part of a documentary project on India's haunted locations. Ignoring the villagers' warnings, they arrive at the Haveli on a moonless night. The Haveli's entrance. As they approach the Haveli, its massive wooden doors creak open on their own. The air is thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of distant whispers sends shivers down their spines. A blood-red handprint on the door catches Ria's attention, but she dismisses it as faded paint. Inside, the Haveli is eerily silent. Cobwebs hang like curtains, and the floor creaks with every step. A massive portrait of Thakur Veer Singh dominates the main hall. His piercing eyes seem to follow them as they move. Aman sets up his camera, while Kunal explores the Haveli's sprawling corridors. Ria, meanwhile, finds a dusty journal lying on a table. It belonged to the Thakur's youngest daughter, Priya, who wrote about strange rituals her father performed in the basement. Of the first omen. While filming, Aman hears faint sobbing. He follows the sound to a locked room at the end of the corridor. Suddenly, the door unlocks and swings open. Inside, he finds a mirror covered with a black cloth. As he removes the cloth, the mirror shows not his reflection, but a gruesome image of a bloodied man hanging from the ceiling. Terrified, Aman stumbles back, but the door slams shut behind him. When Kunal and Ria find him moments later, Aman is pale and shivering, unable to explain what he saw. The basement ritual room. Ria insists they leave, but Kunal, skeptical and curious, convinces them to explore the basement mentioned in the journal. They find a trap door hidden beneath a tattered rug in the main hall. As they descend, the air grows colder, and the smell of rotting flesh becomes unbearable. The basement is filled with strange symbols drawn in blood, animal bones, and a massive iron cage. In the center lies an ancient book, bound in human skin. Ria reads a passage aloud, unintentionally invoking the spirits of the Thakur's family. The walls begin to bleed, and faint whispers turn into ear-piercing screams. A shadowy figure emerges from the darkness. It's Thakur Veer Singh himself, his face twisted in anger and agony. The curse, unleashed. The Thakur reveals through terrifying visions that he was betrayed by his most trusted servant, who poisoned his family and burned their bodies to claim the Havali's wealth. The betrayal and the violent deaths bound their spirits to the Havali, condemning them to eternal torment. As the group tries to escape, the Havali's layout begins to shift. Doors lead to dead ends, corridors loop endlessly, and the walls seem alive, pulsating with blood. Kunal is the first to fall victim. A shadow grabs him, dragging him into the iron cage. The cage locks itself, and Kunal's screams fade as his body is crushed into dust. Aman's fate. Aman and Ria make it back to the main hall, but the portrait of the Thakur begins to bleed. His painted hand reaches out, pulling Aman into the canvas. Aman's muffled screams echo as the portrait shifts, now showing his face twisted in terror alongside the Thakur's. Ria's final stand. Ria, now alone, discovers the journal's final entry. It reveals a way to break the curse. The Thakur's ashes, hidden in the basement, must be burned to free the trapped souls. Summoning her courage, she retrieves the ashes, dodging the spirits that claw at her from every corner. She reaches the courtyard and sets the ashes on fire. The flames roar unnaturally high, illuminating the spirits of the Thakur and his family. For a moment, it seems the curse is broken. The spirits fade, and the Havali falls silent. The twist ending. As Ria steps out of the Haveli, she feels a sharp pain in her chest. She looks down to see a bloody handprint forming on her shirt. The Thakur's voice whispers in her ear, "You set us free, but you belong to me now." Ria collapses, her lifeless body dragged back into the Haveli by unseen forces. The doors slam shut and the Haveli stands silent once more, waiting for its next victims. The footage shows the friends horrified, but the final frame is chilling. Ria's face in the